RunDNA has an incredible range of running and walking footwear, apparel and accessories, catering for anyone who is looking for the right shoe and fit. They're trusted by podiatrists and physiotherapists right across Adelaide. The RunDNA fitters advice is second to none. So if it's time for new walkers or runners, you can find RunDNA, 20 Manton Street, Hindmarsh, or the other location, 391 Fullarton Road at Fullarton. Both stores open 7 days a week, plenty of off-street parking. You can find them online as well, rundna.com.au. If you run or walk, then you need to run DNA.
It's 26th of June 2025 and you're with Hooked on Sport. I'm Wallace Long and welcome Ben Hook.
Nostra Wallace. Good afternoon. Nice to see you over the computer screen. Last week, you said that the Port Adelaide Football Club board will have to very, very carefully assess their governance issues around Warren Tredrea. And what was the announcement that came from the football club and David Koch yesterday? That they are currently assessing their governance issues around their board member, Warren Tredrea. 100 out of 100 for you, Wallace. You read the future perfectly, my man.
Well, I might have got that right, but I certainly didn't get the Swans and Port right.
Yeah, gee. Well, we'll get to Port and Carlton as well. I've got to be honest with you. I went along to the Port Swans game. Geez, I enjoyed it. It actually, I haven't been to many football games this year. I used to go to 22 from 22. And then more recently, it was just Crows games. And this year, because I'm doing less work for the Crows, I had not been to an AFL game at Adelaide Oval, which is kind of embarrassing, really. So I'll shout out to Bruce Winter, the great Sturton Norwood legend who coached the Eagles as well, a good friend of ours, Wallace, who lent me a couple of tickets, and I went along to Port and Sydney. Gee, it's an enjoyable spectacle, AFL football, I've got to say. And I reckon that twilight time slot is excellent. Great time to take kids, as I did. Look, loved it. But yeah, Port Adelaide, super disappointing. What stood out to me, whenever Sydney got the ball at half back, their capacity to cut through Port's defence, I thought was damning on the way Port Adelaide structured up, and that's going to be something that the club's going to have to work out for the rest of the year, and then the new coach, Josh Carr's, going to have to work out ahead of next year, because that was significant the way on turnover Sydney just cut through Port Adelaide structure.
33,000 people there. I agree. It was a great night. I had the opportunity to stand on the ground and support the boys as they ran through the two lines of people. Yeah,
I saw, a bunch of 15-year-olds and Wallace Long.
Good fun.
Look, it's a rare experience. I mean, being out in the middle of Adelaide Oval, as I've had the opportunity to do very occasionally, and certainly before the redevelopment, going back a long time ago, I played maybe 10 games of cricket on Adelaide Oval, and they are incredible experiences. So yes, whether you are 14 or
a bit older,
54 plus, take the opportunity, because it is something quite special. And we'll get back to the topic that I think is probably worth discussing. Went to the football, Port Adelaide, very disappointing, had the radio on 5AA on the way home, and I'm listening to Warren Tredrea assess the game. And the whole way through, I'm thinking, so this is before all the furor of this week, of course, and I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, he's a good communicator on footy. He's concise, he makes sense, he provides information that I think, oh yeah, I didn't really think of that. And then we move on to this week. It's interesting that the 5AA people are all very supportive of him. And I can understand that when I hear him on air. I imagine his defence this week is going to be, I didn't say it, it was just someone else on my podcast. Yeah, Port have got a problem. They've made that statement. And I would argue, Wallace, and you might have a different thought on this, but I would suggest that statement doesn't come from the club unless a decision on Warren Tredrea is already made.
In their statement, it's directors and officials of the club are entitled to their personal views. However, these are concerns that recent content published is in breach of these standards. The club is committed to upholding the professional standards our members, partners and the community expect and deserve. And they're going to make a determination. They'll move forward accordingly.
Do you think that the Port Adelaide Football Club, from a board level, has moved on from Warren Tredrea already, and this is just the formalities of it all?
As we touched on last week, what would they be doing? They'd be protecting their investment in the brand and the business that they have. How they're interpreting that and when this came out and who complained about it. But at the end of the day, they're going to go through a process, which is the right way to do it, and they'll make a decision and they'll deal with it as they move forward.
Well, I cannot see, once you've made that statement, unless Warren Tredrea is going to walk everything back, that's the only way forward. And I understand you probably can't make such a bold statement, and you come from a different position that I do. But I'd be stunned if there's any other outcome other than Warren Tredrea being pushed out of the Port Adelaide Football Club before the end of the season.
Just one thing on Adelaide Oval. Standing on Adelaide Oval, Damien Hoff, unbelievable teamwork they do to turn up a ground that is in great condition week in, week out.
Tonight, Wallace, Port Adelaide takes on Carlton. This is two clubs who've lost every idea of where they're actually at. Both clubs have given up their first-round draft pick to get players in this year. So in 2025, they'll go to the draft without a first-round draft pick to get players in this year. Carlton have given up their second-round draft pick as well. Port Adelaide in the deal to get Jack Lukosius in, who's barely played. He'll play tonight, I believe. But it is hard to believe that at AFL level you can be so far removed from reality and where you think your list is at. I mentioned the draft at the end of the year. Interestingly enough, we're talking about Warren Tredrea. He said on 5AA that he doesn't think the draft this year is all that amazing, and maybe giving up draft picks for this upcoming draft to get players in the year before isn't a bad thing. But it's just worth noting the cost for Port Adelaide of the deal they did here. They moved on Dan Houston to Collingwood and gave up their 2025 first-round pick. Right now, so they're seventh from bottom. That would mean pick 7. I suspect that West Coast will get a compensation pick in that first band because they'll almost certainly lose Oscar Allen. So I imagine that's pick 8. So they've given up Houston and this year's pick 8 to bring in Lukosius, who's been injured all year, and a kid called Joe Berry that we're not going to make any assessment on because he was pick 13 in the 2024 draft. Unfair to assess him right now, but gee, that looks light for Port Adelaide, doesn't it? That looks like a deal that has gone wrong for them at this point in time.
Great contrast to what you identified the Crows did and how successful they were in getting some really good players for not a lot of coin.
Yeah, that's been and you go back and listen to the previous episode, Wallace. You could probably put that in the show notes. But yeah, Adelaide gets a lot of criticism about how well they've done at the top end of the draft, in particular their first and second round draft picks. But if you look, and we did that assessment, there was about 14 players who I think had cost them, I don't know, around about 7 draft picks, all of them pick 25 and out. The way they'd pick players up on the supplemental list, on a trade for a very, very lowly pick, who picked up the odd delisted free agent, brought them in off the rookie list. It's been really incredible what Adelaide has done with their list with not very much, which has then allowed them to spend a bit of draft capital on a player like Isaac Rankin, who is, almost a generational player and is going to be someone who potentially leads Adelaide to their first premiership since 1998. So, all very exciting for Adelaide, all a little bit dark for Port Adelaide right now. And you would argue tonight's game, all hope lost for the loser. It's going to be a very, very difficult last 6 or 7 weeks of the season if you drop tonight's game, Port versus Carlton. It's a car crash waiting to happen, isn't it?
And who's going to survive the car crash?
Yeah, I just think Port Adelaide are more likely to bounce back. My concern about Port is that they seem to be reliant on let's do it for Ken, and I don't think that's a sustainable method of motivation. You have to have some self-motivation on top of just that sense of we got to do it for the coach. We got to support the coach. But they've been under fire this week because they were so poor against Sydney, and I do expect them to bounce back. Carlton, my concern about Carlton, quite frankly, and this is really harsh, but I am unconvinced on Michael Voss as an AFL coach. Now, that's a big statement to make, and I'm not an expert on these sorts of fields, but the way they played last week against North Melbourne, it was completely out of kilter with how you would try and win a game of football. This is a side that they have dined out on routinely. They smashed them on Good Friday with this attacking brand of football. And then all they wanted to do was kick it sideways and backwards against North Melbourne and just keep them in the fight. It was ridiculous the way they played. They got so far down. They nearly ran them down in the last quarter when they finally played their normal brand of footy, which was to be a little bit more aggressive. They're poor with the ball, and I don't think they're well coached. I don't think they're well structured up. And I think all of that leads to the likelihood that Michael Voss is probably in his last year coaching at the club.
Alia and Travis Boak are two of the players returning for Port. What are your thoughts on Lear in the back and how that'll go for them?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, there was a time in AFL football 20 years ago that two 30-year-olds coming back in suggested that you were really struggling with your youth, but they will make Port Adelaide a lot better side. Travis Boak is just so professional in what he does. He had a bad final series last year, and I wondered if he would go on, but he's had a crook back this year, which is, it's always difficult for a footballer when your back is no good. But Aliir plus the way Asava Radagalier is playing in defence, I think will just help them structure up and be able to create more turnover and hopefully get that slingshot effect that is so effective in AFL football these days. And then Travis Boak's just such a professional. And I think he lifts other players. He's such a team player that he'll win hard ball and he'll get it to the outside for a guy like Zach Butters, who is doing a lot of that inside work at the moment. So, yeah, I think Port Adelaide are a lot better side with those two guys in, and I think that will be enough to get them over the line against Carlton tonight.
Let's move on to fair or farce. The AFL world is too quick to judge coaches. Fair or farce?
It's a farce, Wallace, but it's only a farce because every other sport is even quicker to judge coaches than we judge them here in Australian rules football. But, gee, we're still red hot, aren't we? I was just thinking about this in the last couple of hours. I want to talk to you about all of the guys who are current AFL senior coaches who've had their head called for in the last 3 years. So let's say 2023, it was Sam Mitchell, was Ken Hinkley. And you could put Ken Hinkley in a few years, couldn't you? And it was Luke Beveridge. In 2024, it was Chris Fagan. It was Matthew Nix. It was Alistair Clarkson. It was Adam Simpson, who in the end did move on at the end of 2024. It was Justin Longmuir, and it was Simon Goodwin. You could put Simon Goodwin in a couple of these years as well, another premiership coach. In this year, it's been Michael Voss. Add my name to the list of people who probably think Vossi should move on. Dean Cox, we were talking about him only 6 or 7 weeks ago, Wallace, that Dean Cox maybe wasn't the right fit for Sydney. Brett Scott at Essendon. Ross Lyon has had his head called for 100 times. So who does that leave? Well, the first-year coaches of two very, very ordinary teams, Adam Uze and Andrew McWalter at Richmond and West Coast, respectively. So they get a reprieve because they're coaching rubbish teams. And then the premiership coaches, Damien Hardwick, Craig McRae, and Chris Scott. So only 3 coaches who we've had any sort of time to assess out of the 18 haven't been called to be, sacked or moved on in the last 3 years. Everyone else, 13 of the 15, the 2 that get a little bit of a chop out because they're at bad clubs and they're only in their first year. The other 13 have all had their head called for. Gee, it's a tough job, isn't it? Why would you want, aside from the cash and just your passion to win, why would you want to be an AFL coach? It's a brutal industry.
The positive drugs test attributed to Montrezl Harrell in China only underlines what a fast Chinese drug testing is. Fair or farce?
Fair. I'm a little bit cautious about how I go about this. I don't think we should applaud anyone as a result of a positive drugs test. Okay, so it sounds like that he has accepted the charge. He's done away with his B sample, which is bizarre to me. And I don't know if there's some quirks of the Chinese system that you're better off foregoing the B sample being tested, but that's something that has been made public in all of this. So I'm always uncomfortable with the idea that you can champion someone for being on drugs. I used to get in arguments with people about Lance Armstrong who were adamant that he was clean. And then when it turned out he was completely unclean, the argument was, all of the rest of them were on drugs as well. And, I even put Phil Liggett in that category. I'm stunned that Phil Liggett is still held in such high esteem in the cycling industry for his opinion, because he was an absolute devotee of Lance Armstrong. And as much as Armstrong was so nasty with the way he handled media who queried his performances and whether he was using drugs, Liggett was just as bad. And he would even say, well, I will quit my post if Lance Armstrong is on drugs. And of course, turned out Lance Armstrong was on drugs and Phil Liggett still calling the cycling. That's not a real sport, though. Let's be honest. Men's professional cycling is not a real sport. So I just want to give that as the precursor. But we need to, the China Anti-Drug Authority is a bit of an oxymoron for its own athletes, isn't it? It is remarkably untrustworthy. I think, I just hope that Harrell's ultimate suspension is something within a month or two. That would seem reasonable. Anything else would be outlandish. But I'm stunned that the Chinese anti-drug authority has managed to find 2 Americans using marijuana as their big guilty linchpins. All of the innuendo and suspicious that surrounds so many of their athletes seem to test clean time and time again. So I think it's fair to say that finding these guys positive only underlines that the Chinese anti-drug authority is unbelievable in every respect.
Australia will start the home Ashes next summer as huge favourites. Fair or farce?
Yeah, I still probably think this is fair. Gee, the gap is closing. I had a look at the markets only the last 24 hours, Wallace, and Australia is still comfortable favourites to win the Ashes at home. But everything you see with England versus India is that England are going to mount a very, very strong case. And Australia right now looks in a real stage of transition. The bowling is really stable. But to have to bring in a new batter at 1, 3 and 4 for the test overnight in the West Indies, they added 11 runs, the 3 of them. So Sam Constas, Cameron Green at 3 and Josh Inglis at 4. We do have this weird situation in Australian cricket that everyone wants to bat 5, and it just so happens that our own Travis Head bats 5 and everyone else can take a seat. Yeah, look, I still feel like Australia are the favourites, but gee, there's some problems with the Australian cricket team right now. I'm prepared to work with Sam Constas. I think he's a long-term opener. Usman Khawaja scored 47 overnight. It was the most unconvincing 47 I've ever seen. He was dropped twice on the way through. Lucky to make that many. Cameron Green is not a number 3, and Josh Inglis I really don't think is a test number 4. Steve Smith's obviously going to come back into the team. And then I've become a little bit unconvinced on Beau Webster. He was bowled last night by a ball that everyone's saying was a genius ball of the century. It was a straight ball that pitched on off and then hit the bail, the off bail. It wasn't a superstar ball, but he just played all around it. He just strikes me as someone who needs width. If he doesn't get width, and I don't want to get into the tall weeds of where I think his technique is at, but if you bowl outside off stump to him, he will hurt you, seriously hurt you. But if you bowl at the stumps and make it a little bit more difficult for him to score on the offside, you can tie him up and you can get him out. So I think there are some significant problems with the Australian cricket team. Having said all of that, Wallace, I think it's fair. I think the Australian cricket team will win the Ashes this coming summer, and they're favourites right now, and rightly so.
The world's most unlikable sports people are professional golfers. Fair or farce?
Easy answer, Wallace. This is fair. I've been stunned in the last few weeks by the amount of ridiculous guff that has come out of the mouths of golfers. Can I start with Wyndham Clark, who at the US Open, after missing the cut, shooting 8 over 74-74, went into the Oakmont club rooms and destroyed 2 lockers. Now, if you and I walked into someone else's club and destroyed 2 lockers, I expect that we would be probably on the receiving end of a ban somewhere between 5 years and life, and I wouldn't think that was unreasonable. He didn't make any comment about it until he shot 64 at the Travellers in the opening round, and here is what he said. I've had a lot of highs and lows in my career, especially this year, some lows. I made a mistake that I deeply regret. I'm very sorry for what happened, but I'd also like to move on, not only for myself, but for Oakmont, for the USGA, and kind of focus on the rest of the year and things that come up. I still want to try and make the Ryder Cup team. I am still on the outside looking in for the FedEx Cup. So I'm starting to move on and focus on those things. So this bloke has come in and destroyed some lockers in a golf club and said, well, I'm going to move on, and so should everyone else. Oakmont Golf Club should move on. The USGA should move on because I've got other things to focus on. Like I want to be back in the Ryder Cup team. I started to make an appeal to make the Ryder Cup team. I want to win the FedEx Cup. I'm moving on and focusing on those things. And that is only point number 1. I don't know if you're caught up with the Women's PGA Championship. Of course, it was won by our own Minjee Lee, which was just absolutely superb. Now, this course has been designed specifically for professional golf, and we are getting so much further away from the courses that you and I like to play being suitable for professional golfers. So Gil Hance has designed a course called East Fields Ranch in Frisco, California. It's where the home of the PGA is. It is a remarkable course. There are some quirks to it, I understand, but ultimately it's been designed for professional golfers. Angel Yin, who finished top 15 in the PGA Championship, came out and said, this course is quite boring. It's designed for you people. It was Stacey Lewis who complained that all of the pin placements were too hard and said that there was a hole that was 157 yards and the hole was way too long as a par 3. It should have played as 120 yards. And there was another quote that came for her that I was stunned about, which essentially said, the way golf courses should be set up is to make us look good. Could you imagine in any other sport where the defence, so the defence is the course in golf, all right? Could you imagine any other sport? Let's talk about Port and Carlton. Could you imagine Port knocking on Carlton's door, Michael Voss's door, and saying, you're the defence. Can you just make our attack look good? I just find it stunning that these players just want simple, friendly, uniform, week in, week out. Don't give us too much slope. Don't give us too many challenges. We don't want the rough too long. We don't want the course too fast. We want the greens to be able to stop. If we hit it in a bunker, we want the bunker to be absolutely the same, whether we're playing at this course or that course. I'm done with professional golfers. So yes, that is absolutely fair. They are the worst people going around in golf right now. And I've only just scratched the surface of all of the stupid things. Tyrrell Hatton, love him, but what an absolute pillock that person is every time he walks on a golf course. There are so many examples of why professional golfers are just terrible people. And so I'm very, very comfortable making that point.
South Adelaide and West Adelaide should merge. Fair or farce?
Good question. So this was brought up by Malcolm Blight on SEN Sports Day during the week. I think it's farce. I would like to see the SANFL try and support these two clubs that have struggled for so many years. I mean, when I say West have struggled for so many years, they won a flag 10 years ago, so it hasn't been a total disaster for them. And in the lead up to that, they were very, very strong as well, but they really have struggled since then. South Adelaide haven't won a premiership since 1964. Malcolm Blight went on radio and said that they should merge, and he's got some credit points with making that claim as well, because his own club, Woodville, merged with West Torrens back in 1991. So I can understand why Blighty has put it on the agenda. I just love the SANFL to provide some support to these two clubs. Not exactly sure what it should be, but I reckon there's a way of just trying to provide them some assistance before we just go merge. That's the solution, is just pull your resources together. I just was having a look at this. There was a massive change to the rules, in particular for the two AFL clubs in the SANFL in 2024. And one thing that the two AFL clubs are allowed to do is sign one marquee player. So this is a player that was on an AFL list in 2024, can be signed outside of the Crows senior list to play SANFL football specifically in 2025. Why don't we allow South and West just one of those players? And I'm quite comfortable if that comes outside the salary cap as well. They may not be able to fund it, I don't know, but they might be able to find a sponsor who can. So that maybe is, I don't know, let's say it's $80,000. It's a lot of money in SANFL football. I understand that. But maybe that's a way just to provide some support to South Adelaide and West Adelaide before we go down the road of merging them. I understand that everyone tries to keep the competition even, but it's not even. There are far less resources that West Adelaide and South Adelaide have, in large part because they have very, very few fans and very few large corporate sponsors who can put large amounts of money into the club. When you measure that against a club like Glenelg or a club like Norwood, who have very, very good large numbers of supporters and large numbers of wealthy supporters as well. So that's what I'd like to see before we just go down the road of, okay, it's time to push these two clubs together, probably push them down south. I mean, it would make more sense that they would play at South than at West, but I just feel like there's some options before we go down that road, because that's forever, and I reckon there are still some options for these two clubs. Wallace, there was something that I noticed only on TV on Tuesday night, and that was a situation where Damien Hardwick, the Gold Coast coach, had given the bird while he was on screen. It didn't run during the TV coverage of the game, and it was probably largely forgotten about, except on Tuesday night, the AFL 360 show, which appears on Fox and KO, made a bit of a joke about it, showed the shot of him giving the bird the middle finger, if you like, and just made a bit of a joke about it. I wonder who he was giving that finger to. And it was sort of ended at that. Well, the AFL handed him a $2,000 fine the following day just because that vision ultimately ran. So I want to put you in that situation. You're the CEO of the club. Your coach has been fined for something that you didn't think was going to run on air. Is that something that you need to deal with the coach with, or do you need to start to actually take on the AFL with and say that is completely unreasonable?
It's a bad look. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there have been players that have been fined for doing it to spectators. Similar amount, I understand. There were two lads that got busted for doing the same thing. This one
is it the same thing on the field to fans, or as distinct from in the coach's box, where you probably of the opinion that no one's really watching? It was clearly not during a time when the game was active.
Well, what context do we know? All we saw was a finger going up. I think there's a within the media, I think they're very powerful now because they pay so much money for the rights that they just did that, and they did it, and it's great clickbait. Look at us, we're talking about it on Thursday afternoon. I think at the end of the day, what's socially acceptable, and I think the finger is not acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable in any sport, and there are certain words that have come into the vernacular which have become, people are less stressed about them nowadays than they were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I think the finger, the middle finger, or the bird as you called it, is still not really, it's not accepted. And so I think it shows the wrong, it's really bad for a coach to do it. I think it's terrible that the AFL 360, other than for clickbait, ended up showing it because they're baiting the AFL in a way. I think the other thing too is, I think if I was the AFL, I would have been given the CEO, of the Gold Coast a call and just say, please explain what went on, rather than just flicking the fine straight to Damien Hardwick. Because the reality, they're now suggesting, I mean, on the show, they were even laughing about it. And Uze's sort of going, what the hell was that? It's such an unusual thing to be shown in what's supposed to be a really, a thoughtful and considered show. So to answer your question, CEO, have a chat with Damien. Let's say, mate, we've got to cut this out. This is not the way we're going to be. I'll talk to the AFL and we'll just deal with it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think you're right in part. I think the CEO having a private conversation with Damien and saying, hey, that's unbecoming. Let's just avoid that sort of stuff and we'll move on. But in public, I would have defended the coach and I would have said that is completely unreasonable, the AFL. Give us a call, have a conversation about it. But this did not need to be a punitive fine. It just goes to show, I think, where there's a real vacuum of leadership in the AFL since the departure of Gillan McLachlan. There are many, many ways that could have been solved over and above that. And so I would have been out on the front foot trying to defend my coach or my staff member in that particular scenario.
It's not hard to pick up the phone and have a conversation rather than just say, oh, did you see that? Probably via text message between them, and they sit there and say, okay, we'll just hit them with the fine tomorrow.
Yeah, that is just a classic example of the complete vacuum of leadership at AFL House. So we wrap it up with the rankings?
Let's get on. Hey, has there been any movement this week in the power rankings?
Quite a bit, yes. Yeah, quite a bit. It's still the same leader, but there has been a few massive bounces, and I'll tell you about them as we go. Adelaide Thunderbirds at 10. They hung in there. They lost to the Fever, West Coast Fever, pretty good side from Perth. They only just lost. They led most of the match. They're still alive, though, Wallace. They've got to win their last two, and if they can beat the Vixens this weekend, then they're still in the hunt for the finals. I don't think they do any damage in the finals, but they stay in my rankings as a result. Just to explain the rankings, my best 10 sports clubs in South Australia at either National League or State League level, and they're a power ranking system, so how well you're going more recently has more weight than what you've done 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks ago. At 9, the Seacliff Hockey Club. They have had a massive drop, Wallace. They were defeated last weekend by Burnside, and Burnside is the magic story of South Australian hockey. They have re-emerged as a force and not before time. There's been two distinct divisions in South Australian hockey for a number of years now. It's been Seacliff, Adelaide, Port Adelaide and North East. And then Burnside, Grange Royals, Forestville and Adelaide University have been the absolute have-nots of the competition. And that's really been the way in both men and women. The Adelaide Uni women have been a little bit stronger than the men certainly have, but that's been the way it is. But the fact that Burnside are second and they've defeated Seacliff 5-1, so that's a massive win for them. So they're going to be a watch for the power rankings over the rest of the year. I've got the Brighton lacrosse women at 8. They beat the North Eagles 7-0. North Eagles are a wonderful story in their own right, Wallace. We don't have time for it now. We will talk about them some other time. 4 years in the competition yet to have a win, the North Eagles, but they're still sticking at it. Good on them. Oakdale at 7 in the Premier League netball. They're a game clear. They meet Contacts next Friday night. I think I might have made the point that Contacts and Matrix get some reinforcements from round 11. They've had a lot of players in the National League reserves competition that's been going on. At number 6, I've got the Adelaide Hockey women. They had a 1-0 win over Forestville at Unley. So that's another watch, Unley as well. I think we might have talked about that before. West Adelaide women's soccer team, they won 7-1 over Burkalla, who are 5th. So that's a huge win. Dominant performance, and they're still 8 points clear. Up to 4th, Central District Lions. The men in the NBL won Central competition. They defeated North Adelaide by 33 points, while the Eagles, who have been equal on the ladder with them, lost to Woodville. So the Lions are now top. Lions and Eagles meet in 2 weeks' time at Starplex at Elizabeth on July 6th. That is going to be an amazing game. Crows dropped a place after the bye. Sturt went up to 2nd. They're 10-0 in the SANFL. They defeated flag rivals Glenelg at Brighton Road. And then the number 1 team is Metro Stars. They're 11 points clear on top after defeating Beograd 4-1. So Metro Stars in this diabolical uniform of red and yellow with this weird name Metro Stars are right now my number 1 sports club in South Australia.
Brilliant, Hooky. And before we wrap up, how's you running this week?
Yeah, so we've talked about a bit of a hamstring injury. I've just sort of put it to one side, Wallace. I said, look, it's going to hurt. I'm going to run too bad. I saw my physio last week. He said, toughen up. That was worth the $90 I paid him or whatever it was. 28 Ks today. Geez, I struggled legs-wise. I felt good. It wasn't getting too tired. Mentally, I felt good. But, yeah, got 28 Ks done, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm really proud of that because that's a good effort 5 weeks out from a marathon. But I also think to myself, my goodness, that's only 2/3. I've got another 14 Ks to go, and that is going to be a mental challenge still to come.
Excellent. You're picking Port tonight. I'll pick Carlton. Yep. You have a great weekend and look forward to catching up with you next week.
Well, after your ability to read the future, mate, I suspect Carlton win pretty comfortably as a result of that. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd encourage you to take a listen to Beyond the Club. It's a project I've been working on with Flinders University. Now I co-host it with Professor Sam Elliott, and we break down all the latest research on how to maximise the experience of junior and club athletes. There's a range of resources, special guests, and cutting-edge info on how you can make your club a safer, happier place for your kids and their club mates. Beyond the Club, wherever you get your podcasts.